So in a story that seems to have some parallels to the recent Chris Cyborg situation that led to her eventually getting released by the UFC, Fight to Win, which is a really popular Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu promotion, probably I'd say one of the biggest entertainment Jiu-Jitsu shows of the. Really, you could probably say they are the biggest because what ADCC do and what IBJJF does is different from what Fight to Win does. But they put on a lot of shows, typically have one every week, and they recently had a title fight with Gabi Garcia versus I believe it was Natalie De Jesus. But in the lead up to it, there were a lot of comments that were online about it, as there are with just about any other Gabi Garcia match, whether it's a fight in Ryzen or another Jiu-Jitsu fight. And the CEO of Fight to Win, Seth Daniels, wasn't particularly happy about it, so he put out some harsh words about it. So we'll go through the article and actually see what he said. So here he was saying, really disgusted of the comments from all the bitch-ass trolls over the past week regarding Gabi Garcia. The shit some of you pussy-ass bitches talk about this woman who has accomplished more than any other jiu-jitsu athlete that is generally the sweetest person, takes time for her fans. There are a lot. Makes me sick. I wish any of you would come to a Fight to Win event and say it to her face, win or lose, Gabi has accomplished more than any of you ever will, bitches. So I guess he just kind of got tired of reading a lot of negative comments about him and went along these lines. And I think his defense, it's very similar to the defenses that you hear of Chris Cyborg, in that oftentimes when people criticize Chris Cyborg, it's for either being a steroid cheat in the past, being a suspected current steroid cheat based off of the smell test, or just looking masculine, which kind of ties into the steroid cheating because oftentimes a lot of these steroids that they're using tend to provide male hormones. So it sort of goes hand in hand. And oftentimes, rather than saying, well, actually, no, she doesn't use steroids, or no, we disagree with your assessment, it's more so, yeah, but she's a really nice person, so why are you being so mean to her? So it's worth mentioning that his big thing isn't, no, she never uses steroids. It's, oh, she's such a wonderful person and she's so nice. And I think it's worth noting with just about everyone in this world, I don't think I've ever met someone who is a totally good person. I don't think I've ever met someone who's a totally bad person. There are people who do good things and and they also do bad things. And as a person, you try to have the good things outweigh the bad. So with Gabi Garcia, it sure sounds like there are definitely some good things about her. She seems like a perfectly nice person. But there are also definitely some bad things about her. For example, she used steroids and competes in a combat sport with other people while on the sauce. And if you look at her, it seems as though that body didn't just come from one failed drug test back in 2013, that there's probably a little bit more to it. So if people want to suspect that that's the case, I think it's kind of understandable. There's reason to believe that not everything there is natural, and the fact that she actually did fail a drug test kind of goes to show that. But to go through the article, it says trolling perpetuated by hobbyists is much part of the grappling culture at this point. And there's a couple other things. Here's another quote from Seth Daniels. So he's saying, everyone talking appearance, attacking a woman behind a keyboard kills me. It all bothers me, but with Gabi in particular because of how sweet a person she is. So there it is, back to how nice she is. Garcia is widely known as a kind and humble practitioner who's benevolent with fans and competitors alike. Then it says, when it comes to hating female fighters, regardless of discipline, commenters tend to stick to one of three hateful thesis statements. The fighter's getting attention because she's a slut. That's really not the case with Gabi. I don't think she gets a whole lot of criticism along those lines. The fighter is only winning because she's on steroids. That one she definitely gets. And not actually being a woman at all. That one she also definitely gets. Garcia tends to deal with the latter two the most, including being called a dude who beats up grandmas and complaints about PEDs like the one which appeared on Reddit. So this says she's a cheater, a steroid-using cheater. You're obviously a pathetic groupie who doesn't care about a fair match in jiu-jitsu. Steroids, disrespecting by missing weight and beating up grandmas. Come on, dude, haha. Now the beat up grandmas thing, that's a little tricky in that let's just pretend that Gabi Garcia is completely natural and she just happens to be a really big woman who is the size of an NFL strong safety, weighs like 240 pounds. In that case, how many women of that size are there just going to be in a competition pool, either for jiu-jitsu or MMA? There's not many. And then when you go on top of that, how many of those people who actually are in the competition pool at that size are at a similar skill level? I mean, you're really whittling it down from there. So for her to actually find something that you consider a fair fight, that would mean you'd have to find another woman who's like 240 pounds, mostly muscle, and at least a high level in some martial art, if not jiu-jitsu. You're not going to find a whole lot of people like that. So just about any time she actually does fight or does get a match, at best, it might be something like what you have a Fight to Win, where it was against someone who was also high level jiu-jitsu, but was significantly smaller than her. Or you get the case in Ryzen where she's fighting a 50-year-old grandma because that's who ends up stepping up and taking the fight. So I guess if you're Gabi, you have a hard enough time taking a fight. If a grandma steps up and says, hey, we'll take the fight, I guess if you're Gabi, you kind of have to say yes, even if it looks bad. So I wouldn't really hold that part against Gabi. So the whole fighting grandmas thing, I get from the standpoint of if you're watching it, it looks bad, but if you're Gabi and you're having a hard enough time finding matchups, anyone who says yes, you kind of have to be like, all right, cool, I guess that's who I'm going to fight. So then they said, to be fair, it's common knowledge by now that Garcia failed a 2013 drug test. Yeah, no kidding. Popping positive for the banned substance clomiphene. Garcia was stripped of her medals that year as a result, though USADA later determined her use, a substance which offers fairly conservative performance-enhancing benefits for women and is primarily used to combat infertility, was not negligent. So that means she did it on purpose. They also stated that the fighter was not at fault for the positive test. Okay, so then that kind of contradicts it. I'm not sure what the point is there. Like many athletes who present clomiphene with no other PEDs, she was not banned from competition. I'm not sure if clomiphene in and of itself is considered the PED or whether it's a masking agent. But again, if you've looked at photos of Gabi Garcia, she's got a 6-pack, well, like an 8 or 12-pack, I think. Just absolutely ripped, 240 pounds, and a woman. So, at least from a smell test, is that something you can earn naturally without taking any performance-enhancing substances? I mean, I'm not a physical. That's not my expertise. I got a degree in marketing. I didn't get a degree in like human physiology, so maybe. But I think most people, when they see that, a red alarm goes up in their head, and they're like, "Yeah, this probably isn't natural." And the fact that she did actually pop for a test doesn't help her case any. So he feels that fixating on the past is now unfair. So he said, so this is Seth Daniels. He says she was just tested at Pans where she won double gold, referring to her recent USADA testing, which was negative for PEDs. Fans of Garcia have been quick to point out the hypocrisy of vitriol lobbed at Garcia for assumed steroid use, as it really extends to the many, many world-class male grapplers who have clearly used or are currently using steroids as part of their competitive lifestyle. I mean, I guess that's a little bit tricky, and it sort of applies in MMA as well, where I think females who use steroids oftentimes get a little bit more criticism than men who do. I think part of the reason why is because a lot of these steroids tend to jack up male hormones. So if you're a guy who's taking steroids, you're just becoming like more manly. Whereas if you're a woman who is taking steroids, that in theory would make them more masculine. That's worthy of more criticism because you're sort of like crossing over a bit of a gender barrier there. So that's probably why that criticism exists for Gabi Garcia and for even Chris Cyborg, who tested positive, had a legit positive test once before she got in the UFC. Had that other positive test that got taken back by USADA while she was in the UFC. But people tend to think, even if you're not testing positive after the first test, people would either assume either A, you're still reaping the benefits from past use, or B, that you've just gotten better about how you go about administering the PEDs and you're better about not getting caught. And when you look the way that either Chris Cyborg does or Gabi Garcia does, people will still assume there are either leftover benefits or there's still active benefits of using performance-enhancing drugs. So then a couple more lines here. So she just knows it's part of the game, but that shit has to get to her. Saying she's a dude, all that shit has to kill you. If it's any consolation to Daniels or Garcia, you haven't really achieved success until some slob on the internet is slamming you for accomplishments they can never achieve. So at least there's that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know like what the value of that point is. It's just like, well, Gabi Garcia has some world title, so who are you to criticize her? If your criticism is valid, your criticism is valid. Like making the argument this person achieved X, therefore, if you haven't, you aren't able to criticize. That's a pretty straightforward logical fallacy. You're looking at ad hominem right there. So if people are making the claims, yeah, she looks like a guy, and the fact that she did fail the steroid test, people can definitely get mean, and you can definitely cross some lines with it. But at the same point, anytime a Gabi Garcia or a Chris Cyborg fight, you're probably gonna get comments like this. Is it worth just getting super upset about it? I mean, I don't know. It sounds like Seth Daniels does have a relationship with Gabi Garcia, and I don't mean like they're dating, but I mean like an interpersonal relationship with her. She seems to be very friendly, so he doesn't like the idea of someone picking on a friend, so he lashed out. Seems reasonable for him to act that way, but are people that unreasonable to make the comments they made? You know, maybe it's not nice, but it's the internet. People aren't always nice on the internet, so to me, it's not the best thing, but it's really not that big of a deal either. I don't find it to be the worst thing ever either. It's not like these are totally unfair criticisms to point out at someone who failed a steroid test.